On the alien world of Veltara, where the sky shimmered with strange colors and towering cities reached into the clouds, there lived a princess named Zeravel. She was known across the galaxy not just for her beauty, but for her cold and proud heart. No male, whether from her own species or another, could win her favor. She had rejected countless suitors, leaving a trail of broken hearts and disappointed leaders. To many, she seemed untouchable, an embodiment of strength and independence that no one could challenge. The Intergalactic Council had recently invited humans to join in their diplomatic meetings. Among the humans was Jackson, a soldier chosen to represent his planet on this monumental occasion. He had heard rumors about Zeravel's reputation, her icy demeanor, her refusal to accept any proposals, and the way she treated the males around her with disdain. But Jackson was not easily intimidated. He had faced tougher challenges back home, and he was determined to prove that the humans were more than just a curiosity. Zeravel was sitting at the center of the grand banquet hall, draped in silks of shimmering gold that matched her royal status. Her eyes were cold and distant as she observed the room, dismissing the nervous glances and hopeful gestures of various alien lords vying for her attention. She had no interest in any of them, and it showed in the way she barely acknowledged their advances. Her mind was far from the extravagant meal before her, lost in her thoughts, weighing the possibilities of her future as the ruler of Veltara. When Jackson entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. His presence, though not as grand as some of the alien lords, was undeniably different. There was something about him that stood apart from the rest. His confidence, his calm demeanor, and his strength that came not from physical power, but from an inner resolve. The moment he laid eyes on Zeravel, he felt an immediate pull, an odd mix of awe and defiance. He knew the stories of her rejection, yet he couldn't help but feel that she was more than the rumors that surrounded her. He approached her with steady steps, his gaze unwavering as he bowed before the princess. "Your Highness," Jackson began, his voice firm yet respectful, "it is an honor to meet you." Zeravel's eyes flicked up, meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by his forwardness. Without a word, she turned her gaze back to the banquet, signaling that she was uninterested. Jackson, undeterred, smiled slightly. "I've heard much about you, Princess. I believe the rumors do not do you justice." This time, Zeravel met his gaze again, her lips curling into a faint smile that held no warmth. "I do not care for compliments, human," she said coldly. "I've heard plenty of your kind, and none of them have earned my attention." Her words were harsh, but Jackson wasn't one to back down so easily. "Maybe you've never met someone like me before." Zeravel's smile faded, her eyes narrowing as she considered him for a moment. She didn't say anything further, but simply waved a dismissive hand. "Go, human. There are no games to play here." Jackson stood there for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air, but instead of retreating like the others would have, he held his ground. He could sense something deeper beneath her pride, something that intrigued him. He wasn't going to let a simple rejection end his curiosity. Not yet. After the cold reception in the banquet hall, Jackson couldn't shake off the feeling that Zeravel was hiding something. Her rejection of him wasn't just about pride. It felt like there was more to her story, something deeper, something he wanted to understand. Despite her icy demeanor, he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. There had to be a reason she turned everyone away. Maybe he could be the one to find out. The days passed, and Jackson kept his distance from the princess, observing her from afar. He noticed how she interacted with others. Male suitors, diplomats, and powerful leaders from across the galaxy tried to approach her, but each one was met with the same cold rejection. She never allowed herself to be moved by their words or their gifts. It seemed like nothing could break through her tough exterior. Jackson wasn't used to being ignored. Back on Earth, he had faced plenty of challenges, both physical and mental, but nothing had ever been as difficult as getting through to Zeravel. He wasn't about to let her dismiss him so easily. One evening, after another cold reception from the princess, Jackson approached one of the council members, an old and wise alien named Verex. Verex had witnessed the princess's rejections for years and knew more about Zeravel than anyone else. "Why does she reject every suitor?" Jackson asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "No one can seem to get through to her." Verex looked at Jackson with a knowing smile. "It's not that she does not appreciate them, human. It's that she has never found someone who truly challenges her. Zeravel comes from a long line of powerful rulers. She's seen many things and many men, but she's never been truly impressed." Jackson listened carefully, trying to understand. So what would impress her? Verex's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "You will need to show her strength, strength beyond what she expects. If you want her to notice you, you must do something no one else has dared. The challenge, Jackson, is not just to win her favor. It's to make her see you as something more than just a man." Jackson's mind began to race. What could he do that would show Zeravel something she hadn't seen before? He wasn't like the other suitors who came with gold or promises of power. He had no status, no grand title, but he had something else: determination. The next day, he made his decision. He would challenge Zeravel. Not with words, not with gifts, but with action. He would prove that humans were more than just an afterthought. They had their own kind of strength, one that wasn't measured by titles or wealth, but by the will to push through even the toughest challenges. Jackson found Zeravel alone in the royal gardens, standing tall and regal as always. He approached her without hesitation. "Princess Zeravel," he said, his voice steady and confident, "I challenge you." Zeravel turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Challenge me?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "What could a human possibly challenge me with?" Jackson met her gaze without flinching. "I'll prove to you that a human can do what no other male has. If I succeed, will you at least consider that I might be worthy of your attention?" For the first time, Zeravel seemed intrigued. She studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well, human. Show me what you've got. But remember, if you fail, I will never waste my time with you again." Jackson smiled, feeling a spark of excitement. This was the chance he had been waiting for. The challenge had begun. The challenge was set. Zeravel watched Jackson closely, her gaze sharp and calculating. She had seen many men try to prove themselves, but none had ever impressed her. The idea of a human standing before her, daring to challenge her, was laughable at first. But there was something about Jackson, something different. His confidence, his fearlessness, made her curious. "Follow me," Zeravel commanded, her voice as cold as ever, but there was a hint of curiosity that Jackson couldn't ignore. She led him away from the palace, through a vast courtyard, and out into the hills beyond the city. The landscape around them was rugged and untamed, with jagged cliffs and wild forests stretching into the distance. They came to a clearing where an ancient stone structure stood, partially ruined but still imposing. Zeravel stopped, her eyes narrowing as she faced Jackson. "This is the arena," she said. "Many have come here to test their strength and courage. Some succeed, many fail. The question is, human, can you endure?" Jackson surveyed the area, feeling a rush of excitement. This was his moment. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready to give it his all. The challenge wasn't just about strength. It was about proving that humans could do the impossible. Zeravel stepped aside, gesturing to the open space. "You'll face 3 trials," she said. "Each one will test a different part of your strength. Fail any one of them, and you'll be dismissed." Jackson nodded, his determination growing. He didn't plan on failing. The first trial was physical, a race through the rocky terrain, dodging obstacles and climbing steep walls. Jackson didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, using every ounce of his human agility to navigate the course. Zeravel's eyes followed him, her expression unreadable. As Jackson reached the final stretch, a massive rock slide triggered by the wind began to tumble down the mountain. Most would have stopped, But Jackson pushed forward, leaping over the falling rocks and finishing the race in record time. Zeravel didn't show any sign of approval, but Jackson could see a flicker of surprise in her eyes. He had passed the first trial. The second trial was a test of endurance. Jackson had to carry a heavy load, a massive boulder, across the treacherous ground. The weight was nearly unbearable, but Jackson didn't stop. He gritted his teeth, his muscles burning with each step, and managed to carry the boulder to the finish line. It wasn't easy, and every step felt like an eternity. But Jackson's human resolve kept him moving forward. By the time he reached the end, sweat was dripping from his face. But he had done it. He had passed the second trial. Zeravel watched closely, her eyes calculating. But still, there was no expression on her face. She only nodded once, signaling that the final trial would begin. The third trial would test something more than just physical strength. It was a test of strategy, of using the mind as well as the body. Jackson was taken to a vast maze, where he had to find the quickest way out, all while avoiding traps and pitfalls. Unlike the physical tests, this one required intelligence. The walls of the maze were shifting constantly, making it difficult to navigate. But Jackson was not only determined, he was clever. He studied the movements of the walls, memorizing the patterns and finding the safest path. It took longer than he hoped, but in the end, he emerged from the maze, breathing heavily but triumphant. He had completed the challenge. Zeravel stood silent, watching him. Jackson stood tall, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over him. He had proven that humans had the strength, endurance, and intelligence to face the toughest of trials. But now, it was up to Zeravel to decide if he had truly earned her respect. She said nothing at first, her gaze lingering on him, her expression as cold as ever. But for the first time, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. A recognition, perhaps even admiration. The trials were over. Jackson stood in the clearing, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. He had faced the challenges, each one more difficult than the last, and had come through victorious. But despite his triumph, there was still a silence in the air. Zeravel, standing across from him, had yet to speak, her expression unreadable. She hadn't shown much emotion throughout the trials, but Jackson could tell she was watching him closely, evaluating every move. For a moment, everything seemed still. The wind rustled through the trees around them, the sound filling the quiet space between them. Jackson could feel his heart racing, not just from the physical exertion, but from the uncertainty of what would come next. He had done what no one else had done. He had passed every trial, beaten the impossible, and still, Zeravel had yet to show any sign of approval. Zeravel's gaze was sharp as she observed him, her eyes flickering with something Jackson couldn't quite place. It was almost like doubt, or perhaps something deeper. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him with disdain. There was a flicker of curiosity, something unfamiliar to her, and it caught Jackson off guard. "You've completed the trials," Zeravel finally said, her voice still cold, but not as sharp as before. "But that doesn't mean you've won my favor." Jackson stood tall, not backing down. "I wasn't doing this for favor, Princess. I was doing this to show you that humans are capable of more than you think." Zeravel's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were considering his words carefully. "You think I've been impressed?" She shook her head slightly, her expression still distant. "I've seen many challenge themselves, seen many claim to be something they are not. But you are different, human." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time she had acknowledged his difference. But he couldn't get distracted. He had come here for one reason: to prove that humans were worthy of respect, that they could stand equal to any alien race. "You still doubt me, Princess," Jackson said quietly. "But you don't doubt my strength, do you?" Zeravel's eyes flashed, and for a brief moment, Jackson could see a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "No," she admitted, almost begrudgingly. "You have strength, human, more than I expected. But strength alone is not enough to impress me. Jackson's mind raced. What else did he need to prove? What more could he give her? He wasn't some noble lord with riches or a grand title. He didn't have the power of many of the other suitors she had turned away. But he had his heart, his courage, and a determination that ran deep. "You're right," he said, taking a step forward. "Strength alone isn't enough. But it's not just about physical power. It's about will. It's about heart. And it's about not giving up, even when the odds are against you." Zeravel stared at him, and for the first time, there was no dismissiveness in her gaze. There was something else. Perhaps it was respect, or maybe it was a hint of something more. But Jackson didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. "I may not be like the others, Princess," he said, his voice steady. "But I've proven that humans can face anything. And I'm not leaving until you see that." Zeravel stood still for a long moment, her mind clearly racing. Finally, she spoke again, but this time her voice was quieter, almost thoughtful. "You may have earned more than my respect, human," she said, her eyes still fixed on him. "But the question is, do you truly believe you are ready for what comes next?" Jackson met her gaze without hesitation, a steady confidence growing inside him. "I'm ready for whatever challenge you throw at me, Princess." Her lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "We shall see, human. We shall see." In that moment, Jackson knew the game had only just begun. The air around them felt charged, as if the very ground beneath their feet was shifting. Zeravel's words hung in the air, thick with meaning. "We shall see, human. We shall see." It was as if, in that moment, everything had changed. Jackson could feel the tension in his chest, his pulse quickening. What had just happened? Did she respect him now? Or was this just another challenge, another test he had to pass? For the first time, he had seen something different in Zeravel's eyes, something he couldn't place. It was more than just cold calculation. There was curiosity there, maybe even admiration. But it was fleeting, hidden beneath her royal mask. She had always been so sure of herself, untouchable in her position as princess. But now something had cracked, and Jackson wasn't about to let her retreat back into that fortress of pride. Over the next few days, Zeravel kept her distance, as if weighing her thoughts carefully. She spent more time alone, walking through the palace gardens, deep in thought. Jackson couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. He had done everything he could to impress her, to show her that humans weren't just weak or insignificant. But despite all his efforts, there was still a part of her that remained distant, closed off. He couldn't give up. He knew that much. Even though she had said she wasn't impressed by strength alone, something in his heart told him that she was more than just her royal status. She was a woman who had lived a life full of expectations, full of pressure. And maybe, just maybe, she was looking for something deeper, something beyond the titles, beyond the grandeur of her world. One evening, as the twin suns began to set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jackson found Zeravel standing on the balcony, staring out at the vast, alien landscape. She was alone, her long silken robes flowing gently in the evening breeze. She looked beautiful, but there was a sadness in her posture, a weariness that Jackson couldn't ignore. He walked up to her slowly, not wanting to disturb her but needing to say something. "Princess," he said softly. Zeravel turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that was yet to come. "I've been thinking about what you said." Zeravel finally spoke, her voice softer than before, a hint of something new in it. "You believe humans can face anything, that you're not like the others." She paused, studying him carefully. "You're right. I've seen many come and go, each one thinking they could win my favor. But none of them were like you." Jackson felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. It wasn't the praise he had hoped for, but it was something. Zeravel wasn't dismissing him anymore. She wasn't treating him like just another challenger. There was respect in her tone, however small. "I don't want to be like the others, Princess," Jackson said, his voice steady. "I want to show you that there's more to me than just what you see on the surface, that I can be something more than just a human." Zeravel's eyes softened, and for the briefest moment, Jackson thought he saw a flicker of something like hope in them. She turned back to face the horizon, her voice quiet now. "I never wanted to be the one who turned away the right person, but I've had to, again and again. I've had to protect myself, protect my people. But you—" She paused, her words hanging in the air. "You make me question everything I've believed." Jackson stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Then let me show you," he said gently. "Let me show you that you don't have to face everything alone." For the first time since they met, Zeravel didn't pull away. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful, and something in her eyes softened. There was no mask of indifference anymore, no walls of pride. It was as if, in that moment, she was finally letting herself see him for who he was, not as a human, not as a challenge, but as someone who had fought for her attention and respect. "You may have already shown me more than you know," Zeravel whispered. And for the first time, Jackson felt like he was no longer just another man trying to win her favor. He was someone who had reached her, someone she might truly begin to understand. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the alien landscape, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between him and Zeravel. They had spoken the night before, and though there were no promises, he had sensed a change in her. She was no longer the cold, untouchable princess. There was something more, something real, that had begun to grow between them. But Zeravel wasn't one to let her guard down easily. She was a ruler, someone who had been taught to never show weakness. Her position was everything, and showing vulnerability could cost her everything. Jackson knew this. He knew that even though she had acknowledged something in him, she wasn't going to make it easy. He would have to prove to her that he was truly worthy of her attention, worthy of her trust. As the day progressed, Jackson's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden summons. He was told to meet Zeravel in the training hall. Confused but curious, he made his way there, wondering what challenge awaited him now. When he arrived, Zeravel was already waiting for him. She stood in the center of the room, dressed in her usual regal attire, her eyes fixed ahead with a determined expression. There were no words of greeting, only a cold, steady gaze that spoke volumes. She wasn't going to make things easy. That much was clear. "I've decided that you still have one more trial to face, human," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This one won't be physical, nor will it be about strength. It will be a test of will." Jackson raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "A test of will," he repeated. "What does that mean?" Zeravel's gaze hardened as she looked at him. "It means this trial will test how far you're willing to go, how much you're willing to sacrifice to prove that you are more than just a man. I need to know if you're truly capable of standing by me, not as a suitor, but as someone who can match me in every way." Jackson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just about strength or endurance anymore. This was about his very character, his resolve. It would be a trial of his inner strength, a test of his commitment, and his willingness to give everything for the chance to earn her respect, to earn her trust. Zeravel gestured to the center of the room, where two stone pedestals stood. On each pedestal, there was a strange, glowing crystal. They pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly energy. Jackson had no idea what they were, but something about them felt important. The air around them seemed thick with anticipation. "These crystals hold power," Zeravel explained, her tone cold as always. "The one on the left represents your past, your life before you came here. The one on the right represents your future, the potential you see with me, with us. To pass this trial, you must make a choice." Jackson's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a simple test. It was a decision that could change everything. Zeravel was giving him a choice. To leave behind everything he knew and step into the unknown. to fully commit to a future he wasn't sure he could even imagine. "You must choose," Zeravel said, her voice low and steady. "Will you remain with your past, or will you take the risk of everything you've known and step into the future?" Jackson stood before the two pedestals, his mind racing. The choice was simple yet impossible. Could he leave behind everything for a future he wasn't sure would be worth it? Could he walk away from his life on Earth, from everything he had ever known, just to see if Zeravel's offer was real? He looked at the two crystals, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This wasn't just about proving himself to Zeravel. It was about proving to himself that he was willing to change, to take risks, and to trust in the unknown. With a deep breath, Jackson stepped forward, his decision made. He reached out and touched the crystal representing the future, the unknown. The moment his fingers made contact, the room around them seemed to vibrate with energy, and a pulse of light shot through him. Zeravel stood still, watching him closely. For the first time, there was a faint smile on her lips, something almost imperceptible but real. Jackson had passed the trial, not through strength or endurance, but through his will, his willingness to trust the path ahead. And as the light from the crystal faded, Jackson knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The moment Jackson made his choice, the world around him seemed to pause. The air grew heavy, and the strange hum of the crystal filled the room with an eerie vibration. For a brief second, Jackson wasn't sure what had happened. He stood still, his hand still resting on the glowing crystal, feeling its power coursing through him. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. He had chosen, and now he had to face the consequences. Zeravel had watched him closely throughout the trial, her eyes unreadable. She had expected something, maybe even hoped for it. But Jackson's decision seemed to affect her more than she was willing to show. Her lips pressed together, and for a brief moment, her expression softened. A flicker of something vulnerable flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with her usual cold, controlled demeanor. "You chose the future," she said, her voice steady, but carrying an undertone of surprise. "Do you understand what that means, human?" Jackson looked at her, his breath still heavy from the trial. "I understand," he replied simply. "I chose to move forward, to trust that the future will be worth it, whatever it brings." Zeravel's gaze never wavered from him. "You are not like the others. Most would have chosen the past, afraid of what lies ahead. But you," she paused, her voice growing softer, "you have chosen to risk everything for something you cannot even see." Jackson nodded. Sometimes the greatest risk is not taking a chance. Zeravel was silent for a moment, as if pondering his words. For the first time, she seemed less like a ruler and more like a woman, someone with her own doubts and fears. She stepped closer to him. And for a moment, Jackson thought she might speak. But instead, she reached out and gently touched his arm. It wasn't an order or a command. It was a soft, almost hesitant gesture. Jackson looked at her in surprise, but he didn't pull away. Zeravel had always kept her distance, had always been untouchable. Yet now, her touch felt different, almost as if she were reaching out, not to control, but to connect. "I've spent my life hiding behind walls," Zeravel said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Walls of pride, of power, of duty. I've rejected everyone because I feared. I feared being vulnerable." She met his gaze, her eyes holding a deep sadness that made Jackson's heart ache. "But you have made me see that I cannot continue hiding. Not from you, and not from myself." Jackson could see the vulnerability in her eyes now, the layers of strength and pride starting to crumble. For the first time, he saw the woman beneath the princess, someone who had carried the weight of her responsibilities alone for too long. "Zeravel," Jackson said softly, stepping closer. "You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to do everything alone." She looked at him, her expression shifting. A faint, uncertain smile tugged at her lips, but she quickly suppressed it. "You still don't understand, do you?" she asked, her voice shaky now. "I've been raised to be perfect, to never show weakness. I've been told that showing any softness would ruin me, would ruin my people. But you—" She shook her head, the weight of her own emotions starting to break through. "You make me question everything I've ever known." Jackson reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. For a moment, there was no more pride, no more power. There was just Zeravel, the woman who had fought so hard to keep her heart locked away. "I'm not asking you to change who you are," Jackson whispered. "I'm just asking you to let me in, to let me help." The room felt suddenly warmer, the space between them narrowing as Zeravel's walls began to fall, piece by piece. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to surrender, to trust. When she opened her eyes again, there was something new in them, a softness, a flicker of hope. Maybe you're right," she said, her voice barely audible. "Maybe we don't have to fight so hard alone." And in that moment, Jackson knew that this was the beginning of something far more than just a challenge. It was the start of a bond, one that would change both of their lives forever. The days that followed were filled with change. Zeravel no longer hid behind the walls she had built around her heart. She still carried the weight of her responsibilities, but there was something different in the way she held herself. Jackson had seen her vulnerability, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to shut herself off from him. The princess who had once rejected everyone now found herself drawn to the human who had shown her a strength she never thought possible. Jackson continued to prove himself, not through physical strength or grand gestures, but through his quiet patience and unwavering support. He didn't push her to change. He simply stood by her, allowing her to take her time and come to her own conclusions. He had proven himself worthy of her trust in the trials, but it was his understanding, his willingness to see her as more than just a princess, that had truly won her over. Zeravel had begun to let go of the fear that had ruled her life. She had been taught to believe that showing weakness would destroy her, but Jackson had shown her that being open, being vulnerable, didn't make her weaker, it made her stronger. Slowly, but surely, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to feel more, to trust more. One evening, as they walked together through the royal gardens, Zeravel stopped to admire the view. The twin moons were high in the sky, casting their soft light over the world below. The air was cool, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of distant flowers. It was a peaceful moment, a rare moment of calm in the otherwise hectic life of a princess. "I've never truly appreciated this place," Zeravel said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I've always been so focused on my duties, my responsibilities. I forgot how beautiful a world around me really is." Jackson stood beside her, watching the way the light danced in her eyes. "Sometimes we get so caught up in everything we have to do that we forget to stop and just see what's around us," he said gently. "Maybe that's what you needed all along. Someone to remind you to look up, to see the beauty in the small things." Zeravel turned to him, her gaze searching his face. For the first time, she saw him not just as a challenger or a human, but as someone who had become her equal. She had spent her life trying to protect herself, trying to be perfect. But Jackson had shown her that there was strength in imperfection. There was strength in allowing herself to be who she truly was. "I never thought I could be vulnerable," Zeravel admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you've shown me that it's okay to let my guard down. I don't have to be perfect." Jackson smiled, his eyes softening. "You don't have to be perfect, Zeravel. You're already enough just as you are." The words lingered between them, and in that moment, Zeravel felt something shift inside her. She had spent so many years keeping people at a distance, afraid of what might happen if she let them in. But now, with Jackson beside her, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of hope for the future. She wasn't alone anymore. "I think I'm ready," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Ready to take the next step." Jackson reached out, gently taking her hand in his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. The connection between them was more than enough. In that quiet moment, they both understood that they had crossed a threshold, a new beginning, where the future was uncertain, but full of promise. And as the night stretched on, they'd walk together, side by side, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. This was just the start of a journey, one that would change not only their lives, but the fate of the galaxy itself. Days passed, and the bond between Jackson and Zeravel grew stronger. What had started as a challenge, a test of strength and will, had transformed into something far deeper. Jackson had become more than just a human suitor trying to win her favor. He had become her companion, her equal in ways she never thought possible. They spent time together, talking and learning from one another, their connection deepening with every passing moment. Zeravel, once a distant and untouchable princess, now found herself smiling more often, laughing even in moments of uncertainty. Jackson had a way of seeing her for who she truly was, not as a ruler, but as a person. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something beyond duty. She allowed herself to feel happiness. One evening, they stood side by side on the palace balcony, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. The stars above them twinkled, vast and endless, a reminder of the universe they both inhabited. Zeravel leaned against the stone railing, her eyes lost in the beauty of the night. "You know," she said quietly, her voice soft against the cool breeze, "I never imagined that one day I would be here, standing beside someone like you. Someone who's shown me that I don't have to hide behind my title to be worthy." Jackson turned to her, a smile tugging at his lips. "You were always worthy, Zeravel. You just needed someone to remind you of that." She met his gaze, her eyes searching his face. "I never thought I'd trust anyone enough to let them in," she admitted. "But you've changed that. You've made me believe that maybe I can open up to more than just duty. Maybe there's more for me than just being the princess. Maybe there's a future I can choose for myself." Jackson stepped closer, his heart swelling at her words. "You don't have to be just a princess, Zeravel. You can be whoever you want to be. I'm here, no matter what path you choose." Zeravel smiled, her eyes glistening with something more than just gratitude. There was hope there, a light that had been missing from her life for so long. "And what about you?" she asked. "What do you want, Jackson?" Jackson paused, looking out at the stars above them. His heart raced, knowing this moment was more significant than anything that had come before. "I want to be with you. I want to face whatever comes next with you by my side. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I don't want to face it alone." Zeravel's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him. She reached out, placing her hand gently over his. "Then we'll face it together," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds either, but with you I feel like I can face anything." In that moment, Jackson knew they had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. What had started as a challenge, a test of strength and will, had turned into a partnership, one built on trust, understanding, and a shared hope for the future. They weren't bound by titles or expectations anymore. They were simply two people who had found something real in each other, something worth fighting for. As the night stretched on, they stood together in the quiet of the palace, the stars above them a reminder of the vast possibilities that lay ahead. And for the first time in a long while, Zeravel didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. She felt lighter, freer, knowing that no matter what came next, she had someone by her side, someone who truly understood her. "We're just beginning, aren't we?" Zeravel said softly, her voice filled with the promise of a new chapter. Jackson smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Yes, we are." And with that, the future seemed full of possibilities, endless, exciting, and waiting for them to embrace it together. The days that followed were filled with new beginnings. The once cold and distant princess, Zeravel, had transformed into someone open and warm, not only with Jackson but with everyone around her. She no longer felt the need to hide behind the walls of royalty, nor did she feel bound by the expectations that had always weighed her down. She had chosen a path that was hers to decide, and for the first time, she felt free. Jackson had proven that humans were not just survivors, but strong and resilient in ways no one had expected. He was more than just a man from Earth. He had become her partner, someone who shared her vision, her dreams, and even her doubts. Together, they were a force, strong not because of power, but because of trust. As time passed, the galaxy watched in awe as Zeraville and Jackson faced every challenge together. There were still moments of tension, still moments when Zeraville's royal duties called her away, but they faced those moments side by side, their bond unbreakable. One afternoon, they stood together in the heart of the palace courtyard, overlooking the vast lands of Veltara. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with colors of orange and purple, and the stars were just beginning to appear in the growing darkness. It was a quiet moment, but one full of meaning. Zeraville turned to Jackson, a smile on her lips. "You've changed everything for me, Jackson," she said softly, her voice carrying an emotion he hadn't heard from her before. "Before you, I never thought I could truly live outside of my duty. But now, I know there's more to life than just the weight of a crown." Jackson looked at her, his heart full. "You don't have to be just the princess, Zeraville. You're already everything you need to be. The crown is just a symbol of the responsibility you carry. It doesn't define who you are." Zeraville's smile deepened, her eyes softening as she took his hand in hers. "And you, Jackson, are everything I never expected. I thought I needed someone who could match my power, my strength. But what I really needed was someone who could match my heart." Jackson's chest tightened with emotion. "I've always been here, Zeraville. I've always believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself." Together, they had faced the impossible and had come out stronger, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. They had learned from each other and grown together, and now, there was nothing they couldn't face. As they walked hand in hand through the gardens, the future stretched before them, wide open and full of endless possibilities. There would be challenges ahead: Zeraville's role as princess, the complexities of leading a galaxy, and the differences between their worlds. But none of that seemed impossible now. "I think we're ready," Zeraville said, looking up at the stars. "Ready for everything. Ready to build a future not defined by what we were, but by what we choose to be." Jackson squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with pride and love. "Together, we can build anything." And as the night sky stretched out above them, filled with stars that seemed to shimmer with the possibilities of tomorrow, they knew that their journey was just beginning. They would face the future together, side by side, ready for whatever came next, knowing that they had already overcome the greatest challenge of all: finding each other. In the quiet of the night, with the galaxy spread out before them, they knew they had a future that was theirs to create, a future built on trust, love, and the belief that anything was possible, together.